Well, folks, that was a different intro. This was from the brilliant Dr. Decade. If you're interested, he's got a lot more sound bites and complete songs on SoundCloud. We're going to put up the notes. But yeah, this is just a special welcome to a little special episode to wrap up the first year of This Is Research. And I welcome Nick. Hi, Nick. Happy holidays.
Happy New Year, Wrecker. Hey, so you said that's Dr. Decade.
It is.
Who's Dr. Decade?
Well, it's our good friend, Brian Pentland, who we had on the show before, but, you will spot him in a lot of IS papers and Org Science paper and so forth. When you look at his bios, he always says he's published in Org Science and MIS Quarterly and SoundCloud and YouTube. But he always used the pseudonym Dr. Decade. But once you see his picture, you see it's him. Yeah.
Yeah. And he's a brilliant scholar, but also a musician where he, under the name Dr. Decade. So it's some pretty fun stuff. He sings a lot about academia, doesn't he?
He does, yeah. And sort of social media, right? There's this song called Retweeted, which I think is from his new album, which isn't out yet, but we listened to it before. We might play a new bite at the end of the show. We'll see. All
right, well, enough plugging Pentland stuff. Let's get on with it. What are we doing today, Wrecker?
Well, I thought we wrap up the year. This was our first year of This Is Research, and over the holidays, always get in a little bit of reflection mode. And so okay, was this a good year? What's sort of the highlights of this year? So we figured we do what true academics do. We hand out a few awards.
Our end of the year awards. Ta-da!
Yeah, but not just any awards, not just, best paper awards, because I hear they always go to Jan van Brocke or Nicholas Berente or both of them.
Yeah, what does best paper mean anyway? When you get these best paper awards, it's like best according to what criteria and why? I want to see that. I want to see what are the criteria, why, and it shouldn't be a popularity contest. It should be, I like to have, so why don't we do that today? When we give our awards, let's explain why.
Yeah. So what Nick and I did is we came up with 2 awards, one each, and then we didn't pick nominations ourselves. We asked all of our friends to nominate papers for these 2 categories, and we got a fair few share of nominations. So we had to do some more reading. And today we're going to announce the winners. That's what we're doing.
And when you say our friends, basically anyone who's been on the podcast to date. We sent a note, we included all of them, but then we've also reached out to other random friends of ours trying to get a cross section of folks from different approaches, different, worlds in the IS community.
Absolutely. And these are the 2 awards. So my award is called the Trailblazing Research Award. And the idea is here for a paper. My award,
You're taking, okay, very good.
I'm taking that award, yeah. Now, of course, these are both our awards. So we have 2 awards. One of them is called the Innovative Research Awards, and the other one is the Trailblazing Research Award. And the Trailblazing Research Award is an award to the paper that we feel is really inspiring a lot of future research and really lays the groundwork for a lot of future directions. And, it's just exciting and stimulating and fertile and so forth. So like a conceptual paper that really sets a new ground for the years to come. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and it is. And I have to say, we could have really focused on any paper in our AI special issue because a lot of them in different ways, but we did talk about this a little bit, and some were nominated and we just kind of pushed those off. So we probably discounted our special issue more than, so those are not going to be in this. So I would guide our listeners towards our special issue in managing AI to look at some of those. And I think maybe 1 or 2 easily could have won the Trailblazer Award, but we didn't really focus on those. We focused in other areas, right, Wrecker?
That's right. I would just, for example, one of the papers that did get nominated was the Humans in the Loop work paper by Alok Gupta and Andreas Fugina and Wolf Ketter and others that appeared in the Managing AI special issue. And that's sort of trailblazing in the sense that it's the first really thorough paper that looks at collaborations between human and AI crowds. Yeah. And that opens up a whole range of questions. Of course, it does have surprising findings, but it also opens up with just a whole range of new questions in this sort of area where we now have to figure out how do we relate between humans and machines? How do we figure this out? We know we need augmentation. We don't really know what that looks like. And this is one of the path-breaking papers that looks at some of the issues that surface in collaborations between crowds of humans and AI. Yeah.
And really, if you look at 2021, because that's the theory special issue and the managing AI special issue, I think we'll find a lot of those trailblazing papers. So we had a luxury of having abundant papers. So it was less about identifying papers that are trailblazing, more about weeding them out to find the two that we like the best, right?
Yeah, and how did you look at that? I mean, I had a couple of criteria for weeding out. So for example, one of the ways that I looked at some of the papers is in what sense actually can this paper be a template? In two reasons, like template for, okay, I'm looking for a study to undertake. Does this give me an interesting proposition or question to explore? That's a template. And the other one, does that help me in writing a similar paper? You know, is it a nice template to follow if I ever wanted to write a theoretical conceptual paper as well? And I think some of the papers are really, you know, it's just a beautiful exemplar for how to write such a paper and how to construct a paper and how to theorize systematically and so forth. So I did look at that as well, irrespective of what you know, sort of the content was.
Yeah, and I guess I didn't think of it so much from the template standpoint. I know in our notes back and forth to each other, you wrote that template word there a few times. I didn't really think that way. I looked at it more of like all right, the research endeavor is standing on the shoulders of giants, right? You want to stand, so are they laying a foundation for others to stand on, right? Is there something here that's taking us in a new direction or a slightly different direction and giving us a foundation, right? And I think that would be my primary criterion.
So what you're saying is you're looking at papers that are likely to get cited a lot because they're sort of like the first paper on a particular domain, a particular topic.
Yeah, exactly. You could think in terms of, you know, these research trajectories, and then you can think in terms of maybe a fork or something, a split in the trajectory. And I could see these being, you know, those splitting papers that, you know, are tending to the tradition, but maybe giving us a new direction.
Well, it's just, if you know, it's a bit of a tangent, but it's a little bit what we attempted, I suppose, with our editorial for managing AI. So we didn't just want to review what we know about AI. We didn't want to just summarize the papers that were in the specialist. We did both of that, but we also wanted to sort of change the direction and give some concrete, useful, conceptual sort of tools for people to work with, right? So that's why we spent a lot of our time and effort on a new definition and really honing on the conceptual categories and dimensions with which to look at AI and managing AI, and really giving people some concepts to work with.
So what you're saying is that we're giving our award to ourselves. The managing AI, we'll take it.
It's like any other best paper award, which I've never received ever. And I'm like, why are people not picking me?
Yeah, that's why you came up with this award, so you could give it to yourself.
Yeah, that's right. But in all seriousness, you won a few of them. I mean, I think at ICES you won yet another one. So do you see some commonalities in these few best paper awards? Are they always about the same type of paper, or are they all completely different papers?
No, I think that it's random. And I guess I've gotten lucky a few times, been in the right place at the right time, but I think it's random. It's not random. They're usually quality papers that win these awards. I mean, it rarely does a bad paper. So you have to do quality stuff, but rarely does a bad paper get published, right? I think most papers are interesting in their way and do interesting things. So I think it has to do with and it's probably the same with our awards, right? Why does a paper get an award? Well, number one, there are humans, a small subgroup of humans choosing the awards. So their personal biases and personal preferences are going to come in, right? Yeah. And you know, so that's number one. Number two is it usually is something fairly contemporary. So it has to be current, it has to be forward looking, it has to be different. And if it's a lot of something very similar to what's happened before, then and then frankly, I think theory. I think if you do good work with theory and it's a little bit different, you're more likely to win awards than if you're, say, just doing method stuff. And that doesn't mean it's a better paper or anything, but I think that theory helps. Good, strong theory helps win awards. But that's if it were my formula, it would be something like that. But yeah, I don't know.
The other interesting observation I made when we looked at all the nomination came from a lot of our friends, and they all come from very different traditions. So the writing of these papers, I thought was, you know, completely different. There was some beautifully eloquent paper, and there was some pretty straight and sort of direct type of papers, right? So I haven't realized in a long time how vastly different the writing can be for different papers. Did you notice the same? I thought some of the papers where I was like, whoa, how is this written?
And what's interesting is I had to read papers that I normally wouldn't read.
Yeah,
so let me
exactly.
give you an example, and we're going to talk about it later. It's the Agarwal et al. Paper about learning to be creative in ISR, right? Yeah. Normally, I would look at it, I'd see all the math and be like, all right, I'm not going to read that paper. But because of this, we had to get into it. And I can't say I understand the paper entirely, but man, is it conceptually dense and incredibly, it's almost like you have to study it, or at least from my perspective. Maybe there are people who can just pick it up quickly, but I would need to study. And it's a very short paper. You know, it's shorter than your typical paper, I think, or at least from my standpoint, right? And yet it's so dense and difficult for me that it's like, all right, there are whole genres of publishing out there that, and in areas that I'm interested in.
Yeah. So what I took away from this, I made the same observation. What I took away from this is, folks, you got to do more award things where you are forced to read papers that, normally you wouldn't read. Because I made the same observation. Some of these papers were really difficult for me to read, sometimes because of the math, sometimes because of other things. I also came to appreciate again how vastly differently you can compose and sort of just narrate your paper. Like just said, if you compare the different first pages, I thought that was also very interesting just in how people constructed their papers. And I forgot that. Because very often I am in my own little realm of papers that I like and people that I read and follow and so forth. So that was a really nice exercise.
Well, you know what this exercise made me realize is that best paper is kind of a stupid term. I don't think we should have best paper awards. I think we need to have some modifier in front of best paper. So best theory paper, of course, maybe best, these methodological or computationally intensive analytical papers, right? They're a different genre. You can't compare them to say a really nice qualitative paper in the same way. I think we need to start having categories of best paper as opposed to just saying best.
And of course, being the trendsetters that we are, we are trailblazing ahead and showing everybody else what the best paper award should be in the future, namely the Trailblazing Research Award and the Research Innovation Awards. So maybe we'll start off by talking or mentioning a few of the nominees and then announcing the winner, right? So for example, under the Trailblazing Research Award, so the award for a paper that sets the stage for research to come, we had a really interesting paper about the welfare impact of advertising technologies. Let me hang on one second. Yeah, this was by.
What, you don't have it on hand?
I do. I just had to look up the name. Veronica Marotta, Yuwu, Kaifu Zhang, and Alessandro Acquisti in ISR. And I guess it's fair to say that is a trailblazing one because it has a really interesting dependent variable. Right, welfare impact,
and it's showing how the incentives aren't aligned for that sort of impact, right? It's showing actually that the incentives are aligned against it, right? Which we kind of know, but this is a new discussion direction.
Yeah, right? And I would say that in a lot of research on advertising technologies and recommender systems and so forth, people don't look at welfare or welfare impact normally. And that's just a really nice idea to look at a variable that where we'd say societally that's really relevant, but it's normally in typical business school research, people wouldn't do that. Yeah, so just for that, it's really interesting, coupled with the it's obviously very cleverly thought out and well done, really well done. So that was definitely one of a good nominations for that award.
Well, Recker, we got a bunch of nominations. I don't think we should go over the nominations. That's a good one, and we could talk about each, but let's get on to maybe the runner-up and the winner.
Okay, so I'm not sure we decided on the winner versus runner-up. I'm just going to mention one of them.
I thought we decided on a clear winner.
In this one?
Yeah.
In this category. Okay, you go ahead then, because I'm not sure.
I thought we did. All right.
I thought for me, I think we have two winners.
We do. Category. We're allowed to do that?
Probably not. Okay, I think that the runner-up then is. Is that the winner or the runner-up? To me, that's the winner. Yeah, okay, fair enough. All right. Sorry, folks. This is what happens when you don't prepare.
I thought we prepared.
We prepared a little bit. Okay, so we'll start with the runner-up, right? The runner-up for us is Dorothy Leitner's paper on dignity and the care theory. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so this is a paper that came out in the quarterly special issue on next generation theorizing. And it's just really good theorizing. So many ideas, and then very systematically presented, lots of really dense tables, very fertile, like in the sense of I can take that and take basically any of the columns and construct a study around that. It's just really, really well done. And of course, it has lots of ideas around aspects that we've very simply overlooked so far. Dignity.
You didn't tell anyone what the paper's about. It's the care theory of dignity.
Yeah.
Right. And dignity, how cool is that as a variable, right? It's one that didn't exist in our field. It's one that's so important. And I think it's a good way of capturing the humanistic intent behind a lot of what we're trying to do, right? We talk about bias and fairness, sure, but does that really get at it, right? And I think they problematize that, and these ideas like equality and equity and justice, these are tough ideas. That the philosophy of, but the beauty of dignity from a humanistic standpoint, I think it's, first of all, I think it's a beautiful idea. Secondly, I think they do an incredibly thorough job of addressing dignity for a little IS paper.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
So I think you can build, not only can you establish a research tradition off of dignity from this paper, so it's truly trailblazing. The second thing about the dignity is that it's something we can agree to, depending on which kind of humanistic tradition you're coming from, right? And it's common ground that we can come to, whereas a lot of other words are starting to get more and more loaded. So I think it's wonderful.
It is wonderful. But I mentioned before that I also looked at this from this sort of templating viewpoint. Just want to highlight a few things. So table 2 is just a wonderful example of theoretical integration. That's a table where they relate dignity in a variety of dimensions, behavioral, meritocratic, inherent, to a number of related concepts that are all very complex in itself: empowerment, privacy, emancipation, identity. And they really show how all these things fit together. And then later on in the paper, they have just really beautiful sort of groundwork set up for propositions and hypotheses. And so it doesn't really matter what tradition you're in. You can either go and deductively use this paper and set up an experiment, or you can work inductively and take some of these concepts and work with them and sort of further them and develop them further. It's really wonderful. It really takes a lot of effort away for people to follow in their footsteps.
All right. So Wrecker, that's the runner-up or the co-winner, depending on what you decide in the end. This is your award. I'm sorry for stepping all over it. But then, who's the winner?
Well, the winner is our good friend Lekobi Maruping and Aaron Baird. Baird.
DeQuebe. It's not Lekobi. It's DeQuebe.
DeQuebe.
Maruping and Aaron Baird. Yep.
Yeah, on their paper on next generation information systems use. And the focus on agentic IS artifact, which is a slightly complicated term, but it basically says for sort of actors that are not human. It's really cool, and it connects us to the classic dependent variable in information systems, ISUs.
Yeah, ISUs, absolutely. But that's nice. The theory, but this is why it's trailblazing. There are humans, and then there are technologies, and these are two different things. And yes, they can be socio-technical or socio-material, and we're cyborgs, but these agentic information, these autonomous things, these bots, agents, things like that, blur the line, don't they? They're not the human, they're not the technology, they're in between, and we're getting in and it's, you can think of it in terms of a continuum rather than a categorical distinction now between humans and technologies. And I think this paper gives us the language for that continuum. I'll tell you this honestly, since I've read this paper, and I read a pre-version of this paper, I think I have like 3 or 4 projects that we based entirely on this paper. As a matter of fact, you just asked, I just won a best theory development paper award at ISIS. We wrote that paper entirely based on ideas from this paper. We took a distinction from this paper and then we beat on it a little bit, right? Between 2 types of agentic information systems, right? So I think this paper is essentially creating an entire, if you are doing something on bots, on autonomous agents, on things that it's not one thing, there are different classes of them and they provide 4 of them, but you need to cite this paper. This gives us plenty to go off of, whether you're talking about ISUs or not. it's pretty much in any direction.
Absolutely. But again, I think it's just a wonderful example for how to do these types of things. I mean, you always talk about, extending a conversation, listening, and then responding to it and sort of contributing to something. And if you look closely at this paper, and if you've read a few of the older papers on ISUs and that tradition where that is coming from, this paper is just continuing this conversation. You see this again because they're picking up the concept, the vocabulary that we have established already. Yeah. Task, system, use, actor, and so forth. And they're also extending this in a very systematic, structured way. They're not just throwing up a technology, an autonomous tool from the left and like, how the hell is that going to fit to everything else? No. And again, they do a very thorough job in relating it to all sorts of relevant related theories, actor networks and cognitive fit and stuff like this. So if people want to figure out how should I write this theory paper, you always say, don't do it. It's too difficult. Can never get this published. No, that's not true. I mean, this is a wonderful example for how to do it because it shows, the discipline in disciplined imagination. It's a new idea in a disciplined way, in a very clear way where you can show to reviewers and readers alike, this is how we are extending a conversation that exists and taking a turn in it. It's very obvious and evident. And so, I think it's really nice if you do this and you put your own little theory paper next to it in whatever area. You can have a look at whether you also have such a clear connection to what has come before and what is coming next. That's what I mean. It's so nice in Trailblazing in the sense of, I wish these types of papers existed 20 years ago.
They looked at traditional IS kind of socio-technical concepts, right, around task and around it. But then they had their 4 types of agents, right? The reflexive, supervisory, anticipatory, and they had this idea of delegative. Your delegating agency, somehow it's that. Those are, I think, maybe the 2 key differences. And then they just say, okay, these are my 2 key differences. Now, how does that change what I already know, right? And how would I do that? And then they have this this model where they kind of put it all together. But anyway, so that's either I guess that to me is the biggest trailblazing paper of the year, certainly. And I guess to you, it's one of your top 2.
Yeah, I also thought that was a clear winner, but I also think the other one is a clear winner too. The other one I think is a little bit more, it's more innovative in the domain that it propels: dignity, identity, and emancipation, etc. This one is trailblazing in the sense how it really takes a conversation that has existed for 30 years and shifts it. This is a conversation shifter. The other one's a conversation starter. So in a way, they're sort of both great papers. You know what it also means? Both of them are from the same spatial issue. And that means out of 4 or 5 papers that are published, 2 of them are really awesome. I mean, hats off to Sean and Susan and Andrew and everybody else for pulling this off. I mean, they did a great job in just getting these papers out, right?
Well, but we didn't even talk about the other papers from that special issue, which there are arguments to be made that they are equally impactful. So there are very good papers this year. This was the very good year. So we're going to pivot. We're going from the year of trailblazing, where we were the riches in trailblazing papers, right, to what I would argue. So we're going to shift to go to our second award. And our second award, I guess we're calling the Innovative Research Approaches Award or something like that. And I'll tell you what I ran into here, Wrecker, with you, and we talked about this, but I can't understand all the papers that, as we just mentioned, right, with that Agarwal paper. So I would need to spend more time on them to really be able to evaluate them. So let's do this, and let's talk about the 2 that I understood very well.
Well, I understood 3 of them out of 8. I got 3 out of 8. Nick understood 2 out of 8.
So before we get into the actual ones that we're selecting, let's just go. There were a bunch of papers, and I think what we saw this year was a lot of people incorporating machine learning into more traditional methods, right? So a lot of papers that were nominated to us are doing that sort of thing. They're using variables in, say, econometric studies that they used machine learning to create, right? And then there were a lot of network papers. But what I thought was interesting is 2021, this is the year of the, I don't know what we'd call it, temporal sequence process time, right? Because
coming up,
and really, and now here's why. This is a view into awards, right? The number 1 paper that I'm going to propose that we make the winner, I was associate editor on. So I'm clearly biased.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, but let me give you the runner-up. for the paper that we're going to talk about, just kind of, hey, this is a really good, I think, methodological contribution. And is it Levelette or Levelet, Denford and Yolanda Chan, right? What I think about this paper, it's the MAPS, Methods, Approaches, Perspectives Framework. And what they did with this, and it was published in ISR last year. But what I think they did with this paper, first of all, a lot of it is good old philosophy of science stuff, like from your book, where we need to think, all right, there are different types of theories, there's abduction, some correlate. So for those of us who maybe are early in our stages of research or something, it's a nice way, and it gives us a nice set of directions to go and start thinking about the research. But they've also kind of classified it in different ways. So they have an interesting way, I think, of making sense of the research, but that's not why they're the runner-up. The reason they're the runner-up, in my opinion, is they combined configural analysis, QCA, with correlational analysis, structural equation modeling. I think this is really cool. It's multi-method approach that's two different paradigms coming together. And it's not qual-quant, it's correlational QCA. I think it's really cool. I don't have my head around it entirely, and they looked at some studies and give examples, but I think this is the type of thing that these are the types of innovations we should be attempting and we should be doing in our research, and I don't see enough of. And we've talked about this in the past about mixed method papers and how, well, the problem is then you're assessed by the full structural equation modeling and QCA. And I get it, but I like the way this paper integrated those two strange things.
You know what, me too. And I'm gonna ask Yolanda about it, but here's my theory. My theory is they wanted to write a paper on how to combine qualitative comparative analysis with structural equation modeling, like a mixed method paper on two very popular streams, FQCA and SEM. And outcomes through the review process, outcomes a paper that has all this induction, abduction, deduction, philosophy of science, front end of it. Because I agree with you, the really interesting stuff is where they get really down on the operational level, where they say, okay, here's one study, and this is what the outcome would be if you do classical SEM stuff, and here's QCA, and here's how you can meaningfully combine these two things and create meta inferences. And the entire front end, in a way, is sort of, okay, you read a few philosophy of science textbooks and learn a little bit about abduction, and here's another way of putting that. Having said that, they have this really nice multi-map research process figure. That's really helpful. But I do think, like, it's only a theory. I have no idea whether this is true yet, but I think they started off with combining these two methods, and out comes a paper that has this sort of framework around it as well. Don't you think? That sometimes happens.
Yeah, I think it's clever. I think it's fun, and I would encourage that sort of, and I think, this is hard, but that's the type of thing that I think we want to start playing with. And I think this next year, 2022, we're going to have a lot of, there's going to be that editorial on causation coming out in MIS Quarterly. I think this whole correlation, configuration, counterfactuality, theorizing around these different, or with these different views is going to be a big part of what we discuss. And I think this paper is going to have to be part of that discussion.
And I think what we'll see, I think one of the first things we'll see is the guidelines for computational methods, like the guidelines for mixed methods paper. First of all, we're going to get a guidelines of computational methods. I know your paper is there, but it's sort of not very operational. It's more high level. So I think that'll come. And then the next thing will obviously be mixing computational methods with either traditional or with other computational methods. How do I combine text and image analysis methods? How do I do event data with text data and stuff like this, right? So what are the inferences for this? So I think that's probably already in the making, I'm guessing, but these will be the next paper that come out, and these will be big.
And that's a good setup to our winner, which I'm going to argue the winner for our first research approach innovation award is Brian Pentland, Emma Vast, and Julie Ryan Wolf on in MIS Quarterly on theorizing process dynamics with directed graphs, right? Again, I was the AE, so I'm totally biased, but I think this paper does a couple of things. One is it kind of sets it up as there's organizational people that study processes and routines, and then there's technical people like our podcast we did where we had Vander Alst and Pentland together, right? Those two bridges, this paper attempts to bridge those two, and it does so by creating a language that they can both buy. A language on vertices, edges. It looks at processes, right? Sequences of activities in terms of a directed graph, and then it tells you how to define things in that directed graph, how to analyze them. And it makes so many wonderful, but very short, important distinctions. Like one is variation versus change. There are others. It actually defines everything very quickly, talks about the importance of visualization, gives an example, concludes with kind of this language around motors and mechanisms, which it's just every little part of it. It's almost like it was too short for me, and I was the editor, right? And we wanted them to, but it's almost like every one of these ideas could easily be its own. And I think it's a lot of good guidance for people who want to do process studies and start wanting to get into this world, which I think sequences, temporal traces is a big area, a frontier for research.
It's funny, like for me, this is very close to home, right? I worked with Brian as well as with Julie. Yeah, Julie is from the University of Rochester. So this little example from the dermatology clinic, that's where she is. And I know this data, we've written papers on this data as well. But I think what you've done, you glossed a little bit over figure 3. I think figure 3 is the way to look at it. If you're interested in doing process, sequence, temporal stuff with, digital trace data in event sense, like this figure tells you everything you need to read. This is really a nice summary of the field, where it comes from, sort of the big theories around, what they call mechanisms, the good old views on the motors. This, these are not new ideas, but it really sums up a lot of, these are the key things you will need to read. Then it gives you the language and the tool. And by the way, if people want, that data is just, freely available. This dermatology clinic data here, Brian just put that up on his webpage. I'm going to put up the link as well. You can just download the data and play around yourself if you wanted to. It's really cool.
Yeah. So Brian wins an award today. He's got the bumper music for the beginning of our podcast. I think that's enough of Brian Pentland. I mean, this is what Brian Pentland fan club show. Let's move on, because this is something I want to do. I want to give a second award. Okay. We're going to call, so we're adapting. And this is because I couldn't give this same award, but we're going to call it, I don't know, Next Generation Analytical Methods Award. And the runner-up for the Next Generation Analytical Methods Award, I'm going to give to, and you tell me if you're good with this, Lee, Guy, and Bai in MIS Quarterly, What Will Be Popular Next? Predicting Hotspots in Two-Mode Social Networks, right? These multimodal social networks where they use machine learning to come up with kind of what they call social foci. You can think of it as topics, right?
Yeah.
And then you can, so you're combining unsupervised learning with traditional kind of social network analysis among people. And it's this multimodal network linking people to ideas, essentially, over time, and predicting formation and movement of those ideas. Phenomenal ideas. But this whole idea of using machine learning with traditional social network analysis, to me, is a frontier. They do it elegantly. They use traditional social network approaches. So I thought that paper was really cool, and it's a good example of the sorts of things we are going to hopefully be seeing more and more of in the next.
I want to give a shout out here to a good friend, Jan Mentling. He once said, you can't publish a method engineering paper in a business journal. Well, this is the counterexample. This is, in a way, this is a method engineering paper. They're creating a method. So to all the folks that are creating methods and are interested in design science, etc., this is a really good example. If you look really closely, they're coming up and developing, testing, and proving a method. That's what it is. It's a cool method in an established domain and so forth. It's really cool. So yeah, it can be done. This is not a method application paper. This is a method engineering paper. And as you said,
cool. I didn't even think of it that way.
I totally see it this way. And I think this shows how to do that.
Yeah.
So in my templating sense, this is a really nice template.
So, and then the winner is of the one that I spoke about earlier, is Agarwal, Huang, and Tan. And it's learning to be creative and mutually exciting spatio-temporal point process model for idea generation. And frankly, and it's an ISR, it was last year. I frankly don't understand the whole thing, but I was so intrigued, and I'm going to go study it. But I saw enough to think that, all right, this is what we run into when we think of the only way I know how to relate things that are somehow different, but we don't know how they're different, is with some sort of Euclidean distance score, right? And what they did is they looked, and they're saying, okay, if we go look at people who study, say, geospatial data, and we look at what they do, they have some alternatives to Euclidean distance, right? They have these spatiotemporal models. And how can we apply those spatiotemporal models to this idea of, creativity is such a hard iterative,
Exactly.
and so they're trying to do it, and they have this spatiotemporal point process model, right? But the beauty of this is this: anything we can do, Wrecker, we roll up into variables, right? And this is my issue with processes and sequences. I think that the sequence that things happen can always be rolled up into variables, and then that's what we do, and then we predict. But sometimes that sequence matters in kind of qualitatively different ways, right? And if you look at Andrew Abbott's old work on career trajectories,
Yes,
right,
the musicians,
you might get to the same place, and you might roll it up into things like demographics and whatever. But there are processes, the sequences of activities people follow that get you somewhere and put you on a different course, right? And I think unpacking what we can say with sequences that we can't say just creating variables and rolling them up is, I think, a key frontier. And I think this paper does it a bit.
I think it does it really well. I mean, this is a paper that looks at creativity and open innovation platforms where people can post ideas and they can comment on ideas, etc. And we all know all of that matters, but so far it's really difficult to take all these different forms of, sort of content contributions and the sequences in an account. And they show us how you can do that.
Yeah.
So when you comment versus when you post versus which idea makes it versus which comment was successful in which order over time in different, all of that, they managed to figure out a way of putting that into a model and accounting for all of these differences. And so far, if you look at a lot of the sort of how people measure innovativeness and creativity and these sorts of things, this is just so much more detail, like so much better information that they retain and create in their model. Also, I mean, their model is called highly exciting. I mean, that's gotta be the best model.
Mutually exciting.
That's just awesome.
Yeah, so I actually sent a note out to some of the brilliant junior people in my department. And I'm like, all right, whoever wants to explain this to me, I'll buy you lunch. Because I got the idea, I get the approach, but I want to get into the weeds of this a little more. But anyway, that's the winner for last year. And I think last year was the year of the, temporal, processual, sequential. We're starting to see it roost. I think historically, there have been people like Brian Pentland, who have talked about processes and sequences and been beating that drum, but for whatever reason, and I think it's getting picked up.
Yeah, it is. And I'm telling you why, because we now have data that comes with all the relevant attributes, such as timestamps and granular activity, clicks and stuff like this. For example, we once did a paper with Brian on that was from a call center. It's processual, it's sequences, overtime, blah, blah, blah. The data was created by doing an ethnography in a call center and writing down in a handwritten journal every call and every button and everything that they clicked in a freaking handwritten journal. So you do that for like a month and you get, I don't know, a few hundred entries. That's it. Right now, from the dermatology clinic, I know like the data set that I looked at 25 patient visits in one day. That's already 63,000 entries. And I know they have data for years, over seasons, when flu season hits and blah, 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 blah. All of that is now possible. We didn't have the data. So back then it was all toy, little proof of concepts types of work because he didn't really have a lot of the data in a format and it just wasn't there and it wasn't really accessible. Now it is.
And I'll tell you one thing that I think is another frontier is the power of visualization. I realize that it's easier to roll things up to variables and then run a regression. We see this with social network analysis. People have rich data. They have these incredible visualizations. They do, and then they create a variable and regress it on another variable with some control variables, right? It's like you're taking this beautiful richness and you're, eviscerating it. So, and that's just the way we do it. That's the way we've always done it. And I really wonder if now we're at that frontier of, okay, maybe we're not going to do that. Maybe we're going to show graphs but
it creates a lot of complexity as well. Like, for example, once you talk process and sequence, you need to talk temporality. Where in your normal graphs and figures, where you have 2 axes, maybe 3, where the hell are you going to put time? You need that 4th dimension. In other words, you would need something like animation. That would be really cool, but you can't put it on printed pages. But then again, given that we don't really have printed pages anymore, we would have PDFs, or we have some electronic files. So technically speaking, why don't we have little GIFs or other animations where you saw a network, how it changes with time as interventions come in, and you see sort of the graph changing its form and its pattern and so forth. All of that you can't really do at the moment, because the only thing you can do at the moment is you have little snapshots, and then you put 10 little images next to one another. We just published this simulation paper, same problem. It has a lot of really, really tiny graphs in there, because it's the only way to show what happens over the course of 25,000 iterations.
Yep. Well, anyway, listen, my brother, the year is over, and I guess this season is over.
This season is over. We'll do a little break, folks. We'll come back in, in February, I suppose, start of spring, and start a new season, season 2. Season 3. Season 3. Season 3 is usually we need a new villain,
Who's our villain? All right, we're going to have a villain.
We need a new villain. And usually, there's got to be a character plot twist. There's a new, a character comes in.
Ooh.
I don't know. We'll get a girl on or something. I don't know.
Well, I'll tell you what, the 2 recent women we had on was Kathy Orquart and Kirsten Martin, and they were phenomenal, both of them. So maybe we'll get them both back.
I know what we'll do. We'll do a reverse episode once where, we have someone else be the host and we are the guests.
Oh, geez. I don't know if I can give up that control. It's bad enough talking with you equally. Interrupting each other and talking over each other. I hear it. So I was at ISIS a couple of weeks ago, and depending on who you talk to, there are different, but a few people apparently listen to our podcast. And one person told me in particular that I was the mean one and that I'm mean to you. So apparently I'm not nice to you, Recker. Did you know this? I thought I was nice to you.
You're fine. I was being told that you started dominating me. Intellectually. I was like, what? No, that can't possibly be true.
Oh, geez. All right. So I don't know. I guess people can listen to read what they read into our discussions. But anyway, it's always a pleasure. It was fun. Happy New Year to you, and Happy New Year to everyone. And I promise next year we're not going to just do but Brian should lead us out. Dr. Decade should lead us out with some bumper music on the way out, don't you think? And then next year we're not going to
the award.
We will not give any awards.
Is that we're gonna, give him some airtime for his music. Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Happy New Year to you too, Nick, and we'll continue next year.
Well, it don't matter if I got nothing to say. I'm gonna tweet about it anyway. I'm in a big flock of sarcastic birds, dropping our clever little virtual turds. Retweet it. Don't just read it. Even if you don't believe it, you gotta retweet it. I only follow people who follow back. It's the perfect echo chamber for complicated facts. I can't type and I sure can't spell. I can retweet like I'm ringing a bell. Retweet it. You don't just read it. Even if you don't believe it, you gotta retweet it. I'm tired of tweeting my fingers to the bone. I can't think of a tweet my own. I retweet other people say. Plagiarizing tweets is A-OK. Retweet it. Don't just read it. Even if you don't believe it, you gotta retweet it.